Thanks for joining us on World Now. Now, global reactions are still trailing the announcement of the sudden death of the outspoken Russian critic Alexei Navalny, who was serving a term in the Russian jail. We'll latest details in this report.
Protests and vigils have been held near Russian embassies in many countries in reaction to the death of Alexei Navalny in a Russian jail. He was a ferocious critic of the Russian President Vladimir Putin. More than 100 street protesters have been reportedly detained in Russian cities as people get repeated warnings not to engage in protest. A spokesperson for the late outspoken critic confirmed again Saturday he died in the Russian prison where he was serving a jail sentence. World leaders are reacting. The President of the United States, Joe Biden, says it is glaring the Russian President Vladimir Putin killed the outspoken critic of his invasion of Ukraine and corruption within his government. He says President Putin should be held responsible for the death of Alexei Navalny, who was only 47 years old.
Even in prison, he was a powerful voice for the truth, which is kind of amazing when you think about it. And he could have lived safely in exile after the assassination attempt on him in 2020, which nearly killed him, I might add. But he was traveling outside the country at the time. Instead, he returned to Russia. He returned to Russia, knowing he'd likely be imprisoned or even killed if he continued his work. But he did it anyway, because he believed so deeply in his country, in Russia. Reports of his death, if they're true, and I have no reason to believe they're not, Russian authorities are going to tell their own story. But make no mistake, Putin is responsible for Navalny's death. Putin is responsible.
At the ongoing security conference in Munich, Germany, the U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris gave Alexei Navalny's wife a handshake. Yulia Navalnaya told the security conference that President Putin and his government can't really be believed. She also adds that if the news of her husband's death is true, President Putin and his allies should bear the personal responsibility for it and everything they are doing to Russia. She asked everyone present to unite and help punish the Russian regime. Alexei Navalny's family are also calling for the release of his body by the Russian government.
We've all just received reports that Alexei Navalny has died in Russia. This is, of course, terrible news, which we are working to confirm. My prayers are with his family, including his wife, Yulia, who is with us today. And if confirmed, this would be a further sign of Putin's brutality. Whatever story they tell, let us be clear, Russia is responsible. And we will have more to say on this later.
At the same conference venue, the UK's Foreign Secretary David Cameron said there should be consequences over the death of Alexei Navalny, emphasizing that the UK was, in quote, taking action. Lord Cameron says he would be meeting with other foreign ministers from the group of the G7 nations and would be urging them to take action as well. For the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, Alexei Navalny was killed by the Russian President Vladimir Putin, just like thousands of others who had been reportedly tormented and tortured by him. Alexei Navalny had been in a Russian jail since 2021 over alleged politically motivated charges. In the month of August 2023, he was given an extra 19 years in jail after a 9-year jail sentence.
Now, for more on the controversial death of Alexei Navalny, I'm now being joined by Global Affairs Analyst Nweke from Belgium. Good afternoon, Collins. It's nice to have you join us on the news.
Good afternoon, Bimbo. Thank you for having me.
Right. Now, since the confirmation of the death of the Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny, there's been calls made by his team for his body to be immediately returned to his family. Now, how would you react to the news of his death and, of course, the calls for his body to be released to his family?
It's very sad news that Alexei Navalny had to pay with his life for his very strong belief in democracy in general, but Russian democracy in particular. He didn't have to die. He didn't even have to return to Russia from Germany, where he went to receive treatment on an earlier attempted death, attempted poisoning, of the gentleman, and indeed, where he nearly died. But because of his belief in his country, for love of country, and the building of democracy and democratic institutions in Russia, he returned home, even knowing that he might be returning to his death. And so he has paid with his life. And of course, that raises the question of how far should people go? Could it be better for people to, keep alive, to be able to continue to do what they believe in, rather than, walking into death? And in the end, the family, of course, is right to have called for his body to be returned, because obviously the suspicion is high that the Russian state, with their investigation committee, is actually working very hard to, conceal every evidence that will point to the complicity of the state in his death. That is the basis of the family calling for the return of his body. And of course, that's a very, very legitimate call.
Now, Collins, the Russian Foreign Ministry has rejected what it has called the biased UK assessment of Navalny's death, which, of course, accused Russian authorities of being responsible. And what do you think is the implication of this?
Nothing is going to change, Bimbo. I mean, there have been adversaries, and, Russia remains, a very strong adversary of, the Western hemisphere. And, nothing is going to change that. Now, is the situation going to get worse? I don't know how worse it could be. So really, the Western countries, the United Kingdom, United States, and all of that, they are reacting in a manner that could, of course, very easily be anticipated. Officially, of course, it makes sense to say, okay, let's wait and see what, the autopsy is going to say, let's wait and see what is going to be, the cause of the death. But we all know that even though one cannot legally and categorically, say that Putin actually killed Navalny, there are every reasons for Putin to be held responsible for his death, because only weeks ago he was, moved to a colony where the condition, we understand, is so very, very poor. So it could very well be that the gentleman may have died of natural causes, but was systematically led to his death by, keeping him in the kind of condition that he was kept. So ultimately, yes, Putin, the Russian state, is responsible for his death, even as we await the outcome of whatever investigation that is going on.
Now, let me ask you this. Now, despite warnings that people must not stage any protests or any rally, more protests and rallies, vigils are still going on due to this incident. Now, what do you see happening in coming days?
More chaos.
More vigils, more protests are still going on, despite warnings that people must not stage any rally. And of course, people are being detained. I mean, the protesters are being detained. What do you see happening in coming days?
What I see happening in coming days, Bimbo, is more chaos, probably more killings, because the Russian state, under Putin, has shown itself to be, a very, very strong authoritarian, country, authoritarian president, who will stop at nothing to quell anything that will give him a bad image, a bad name. So people could have actually looked around the street and feel that, well, the gentleman is not, that popular, and there are no, protests. But that is far from the truth. The truth is that these protests are being, quelled. People are being stopped, and it is all building very gradually. One or two things could happen. People may remain obstinate and continue to protest, with more people dying, because shoot at sight might be the order that they get from the Russian president, or people might get scared, which means the government has succeeded in their propaganda and stay home, making it look as if the gentleman doesn't, enjoy that much publicity. But I think everyone knows what is happening.
Now, his wife has asked the world to punish Russia, and we have seen Western leaders condemn Putin's administration for keeping Navalny now in jail. Now, what more do you foresee in coming days? Talking about, beyond this condemnation, what more do you see, happening in coming days?
Remember, it's a vicious circle, of sanctions, calling Putin out, and so on and so forth. In the end, you ask yourself, how have all of this changed? I'm not saying that some of these punitive measures are unnecessary. Certainly not. They are necessary, even if they simply serve the purpose of, condemning those and sending the symbolical message that, autocrats anywhere in the world have got to be called out, and they just can't get away, scot-free. Something has got to be done. So even for the symbolic gesture of those sanctions, yes, more of it must be pronounced, but those that personally target, Putin and his inner circle, those are very much in order, I believe.
All right, thanks indeed for your time with us. That was our global affairs analyst, Nweke, sharing his thoughts with us on the sudden death of the outspoken Russian critic, Alexei Navalny. Thanks indeed for your time with us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.